One man, 5 million dead. An empire that stretched from Spain to the gates of Moscow. And it all began with a nobody from a backwater island who couldn't even speak proper French. How did Napoleon Bonaparte go from being mocked as a foreigner to becoming the most powerful man in Europe? More importantly, how did he manage to convince hundreds of thousands of men to follow him into frozen wastelands and scorching deserts, knowing most of them would never come home? And why, over 200 years after his death, do we still argue about whether he was a genius or a monster? The answer is more complicated than you think. Napoleon Bonaparte didn't just change history. He grabbed it by the throat and twisted it into a shape that still defines our world today. The laws we follow, the way nations wage war, the very concept that talent matters more than bloodline, Napoleon's fingerprints are everywhere. He was a military tactician so brilliant that West Point, Sandhurst, and every major war college still dissects his battles. He was a reformer who dragged feudal Europe kicking and screaming into the modern age. He was a romantic who wrote passionate love letters to his wife while planning the invasion of nations. And he was a conqueror whose ambition knew absolutely no limits, until that very ambition destroyed him completely. This is the story of how one man rose from nothing, seized an empire, rewrote the rules of civilization, and fell harder than anyone in history. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why Napoleon's legacy is more controversial and relevant now than it's ever been. Because the questions Napoleon forces us to ask, about power, about genius, about the price we pay for greatness, those questions have never gone away. Napoleon wasn't born to greatness. In fact, if you'd met him as a child, you'd probably have dismissed him entirely. He was born on August 15, 1769, on the island of Corsica, just 3 months after France had purchased the island from the Republic of Genoa. Think about the timing. His parents had fought against French rule. They'd supported Corsican independence. And now, suddenly, they were French citizens. Napoleon grew up in this weird liminal space, not quite Italian, not quite French, accepted by neither. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer and minor nobleman who spent most of his time networking and schmoozing with the new French authorities, trying to secure advantages for his family. His mother, Letizia, was the real backbone of the household. She was stern, practical, and tough as nails. The family had 8 children who survived to adulthood, and there was never enough money. They lived in a decent house, sure, but they were always one bad year away from real poverty. Young Napoleon learned early that the world didn't owe him anything. If he wanted something, he'd have to take it. When Napoleon arrived at military school in Brienne, France, at age 9, the experience was brutal. Imagine being a small kid with a thick accent, shabby clothes, and a chip on your shoulder the size of Corsica. The other boys were sons of wealthy French nobles. They had fine uniforms, spending money, and that casual arrogance that comes from never having wanted for anything. They called Napoleon the Corsican. They mocked the way he pronounced French words. They excluded him from their games and their social circles. But here's what's interesting. Napoleon didn't try to fit in. He didn't attempt to make friends or smooth over the differences. Instead, he doubled down on being an outsider. He retreated into books. Military history became his obsession. He devoured accounts of Alexander the Great's campaigns, Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, the tactics of Hannibal crossing the Alps. While other students were learning to dance and flirt, Napoleon was studying geometry and ballistics. He was learning how artillery worked, how terrain affected battle, how to read maps like a chess grandmaster reads a board. His teachers noticed something unusual. This angry little Corsican had a mind like a steel trap. He could do complex mathematical calculations in his head. He could memorize entire pages of text after reading them once. He thought in systems and patterns. One instructor wrote that Napoleon would go far if the circumstances favor him, which might be the understatement of the century. By 16, Napoleon graduated and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. This was actually a big deal. Artillery was the technical branch of the army, requiring real mathematical skill. It wasn't just about being brave or knowing how to wave a sword. Napoleon was good at it, but he was also broke, awkward with women, and obsessed with Corsican independence. He spent his early 20s writing pamphlets, getting involved in Corsican politics, and generally going nowhere. At one point, he was so poor he couldn't afford to eat regularly. The great Napoleon Bonaparte, future emperor, was literally starving in rented rooms. Then came the French Revolution in 1789, and everything changed. The old aristocratic order was being torn down. King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette would eventually lose their heads to the guillotine. The entire social structure of France was being demolished and rebuilt. And in that chaos, a man like Napoleon, brilliant, ambitious, unconnected to the old aristocracy, could actually rise. His breakthrough came at the Siege of Toulon in 1793. The port city had rebelled against the revolutionary government and invited British forces to protect them. The French army had been trying to retake Toulon for months and getting nowhere. Napoleon, still just a junior artillery officer, showed up and immediately saw what everyone else had missed. The key wasn't the city itself, it was the fort controlling the harbor. Capture that fort and the British ships would have to leave. Without naval support, the city would fall. Napoleon positioned his artillery batteries on the heights overlooking the harbor. It was dangerous work. He was wounded during the assault. A British bayonet stabbed him in the thigh, but he refused to leave. His cannons pounded the fort mercilessly. The British fleet, now under constant bombardment, evacuated. Toulon surrendered within days. The government in Paris was ecstatic. This young Corsican officer had succeeded where everyone else had failed. Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general at 24 years old. But his real defining moment came 2 years later, in October 1795. Royalist rebels in Paris tried to overthrow the revolutionary government. They assembled a mob of thousands, many of them armed, and marched on the National Convention. The politicians were terrified. They needed someone who could put down the rebellion immediately, someone who wouldn't hesitate. They called Napoleon. His solution was ruthless and efficient. He positioned his artillery in the streets and ordered them to load with grape shot, metal balls that turned cannons into giant shotguns. When the royalist mob advanced, Napoleon gave the order to fire directly into the crowd. The effect was devastating. Bodies fell by the hundreds. Blood ran in the gutters. The rebellion collapsed in minutes and the survivors fled in terror. It was a massacre and Napoleon knew it. But it worked. The government was saved, and Napoleon became the man they turned to when they needed results. Within months, he was given command of the Army of Italy. He was 26 years old, about to embark on a campaign that would make him a legend. To understand Napoleon's genius, you need to understand how warfare worked in the 18th century. Armies moved slowly like giant slugs. They relied on massive supply trains carrying food, ammunition, and equipment. Battles were formal affairs. Two armies would line up, fire at each other until one side broke, and then whoever was left standing would claim victory. Generals were usually nobles who'd inherited their positions. Actual military talent was optional. Napoleon threw all of that out the window. His first radical idea was speed. He restructured his army into independent corps, basically self-contained mini-armies of 10 to 30,000 men, each with its own infantry, cavalry, and artillery. These corps could march separately along different roads, which meant they could cover way more ground. But they were close enough that they could converge and support each other in battle. It was like having multiple fists instead of one big slow-moving club. His second innovation was living off the land. Instead of dragging massive supply trains, his armies would forage and requisition supplies from the territories they passed through. This made them faster and more mobile. It also made them pretty unpopular with the locals, but Napoleon wasn't running for mayor. The Italian campaign of 1796 to 1797 was where Napoleon first showed what he could do. He took command of an army that was literally falling apart. The soldiers hadn't been paid in months. They were starving, poorly equipped, and demoralized. The Austrian armies in northern Italy outnumbered them significantly. Any sane general would have played it safe, maybe fought a defensive campaign and hoped for reinforcements. Napoleon attacked. Within days of taking command, he went on the offensive. He moved so fast the Austrians couldn't coordinate their responses. He'd attack one Austrian army, defeat it, then march his troops overnight to hit another Austrian force before they even knew what was happening. At the Battle of Lodi, he personally led a charge across a bridge under heavy fire. His soldiers started calling him the Little Corporal because he fought alongside them like a common soldier. Within a year, Napoleon had defeated 4 Austrian armies, conquered most of northern Italy, and forced Austria to sign a humiliating peace treaty. He sent wagons full of looted art and treasure back to Paris. The government loved him. The people loved him. His soldiers would have followed him into hell. But his real masterpiece was Austerlitz in 1805. By this time, Napoleon had crowned himself emperor, and a coalition of Austria, Russia, and other powers was trying to destroy him. The Russian and Austrian emperors personally commanded an army of 85,000 men. Napoleon had 68,000. The smart move would have been to retreat and wait for reinforcements. Instead, Napoleon set an elaborate trap. He positioned his army on a plateau near the town of Austerlitz, but he deliberately weakened his right flank, making it look vulnerable. He even abandoned a key high ground position called the Pratzen Heights. His own marshals thought he was crazy, but Napoleon knew exactly what he was doing. The Allied commanders saw that weak right flank and thought Napoleon had made a terrible mistake. They ordered a massive attack, sending thousands of troops down from the Pratzen Heights to crush Napoleon's right. This was exactly what Napoleon wanted. As soon as the Allies committed their forces, Napoleon sent a hidden corps smashing into the now undefended Pratzen Heights. He seized the high ground and split the Allied army in two. The Allied army collapsed. Soldiers fled across frozen ponds which broke under their weight, drowning hundreds. The Russian and Austrian emperors barely escaped. 27,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Napoleon's losses were 9,000. It was over in 9 hours. It was such a perfect victory that military academies study it to this day. What made Napoleon special wasn't just that he won battles. It's that he understood warfare on a deeper level than his opponents. He thought in terms of campaigns, not individual battles. He understood that breaking an enemy's will was more important than killing every soldier. He grasped that speed and surprise could overcome superior numbers. And he had an almost supernatural ability to read terrain, predict enemy movements, and coordinate complex maneuvers across vast distances. His soldiers worshipped him. And here's why. Napoleon didn't treat them like expendable pawns. He learned their names. He visited them in hospitals. He promoted based on merit. If you were talented and brave, you could rise from private to general regardless of your birth. He gave them glory, plunder, and the feeling that they were part of something historic. Men will die for a leader like that. Before we continue with how Napoleon transformed from general to emperor, I want to ask you something. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating figures, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We create this kind of detailed, cinematic, historical content every single week, and subscribing helps us keep making it. Plus, you'll never miss an episode. Now, let's talk about what happened when Napoleon stopped conquering for other people and started building an empire of his own. By 1799, France was exhausted and broken. 10 years of revolution had left the country in chaos. The monarchy had been overthrown and replaced with a republic, but that republic was corrupt and ineffective. The government, called the Directory, was a rotating disaster of incompetent politicians more interested in enriching themselves than actually running the country. The economy was a mess. Inflation was out of control. Brigands and criminals roamed the countryside. People were desperate for stability, for someone strong who could make France work again. Napoleon saw his opportunity. On November 9, 1799, the 18th Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, he and his allies staged a coup. It wasn't subtle. Napoleon marched troops into the legislative chamber. When the politicians protested, his soldiers literally chased them out at bayonet point. Within hours, the Directory was dissolved. A new government was formed with Napoleon as first consul. He was given near-dictatorial powers. Within 3 years, he'd made himself consul for life. In 1804, he went even further. He crowned himself Emperor of the French in an elaborate ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. The Pope himself was there, summoned to bless the coronation. But in the most famous moment, when the Pope was supposed to place the crown on Napoleon's head, Napoleon took the crown and placed it on his own head himself. The message was clear: I owe my power to no one but myself. Think about the audacity of that. This was a man who'd grown up as a minor noble from a backwater island, who'd been mocked for his accent and his shabby clothes. Now he was wearing a crown, sitting on a throne, ruling 70 million people. It was the ultimate middle finger to everyone who'd ever doubted him. But here's the thing: Napoleon didn't just want to play emperor. He actually wanted to remake France. And in many ways he succeeded. The Napoleonic Code, promulgated in 1804, was a complete legal framework that replaced the chaotic mess of feudal laws that had existed before. It guaranteed property rights, outlawed privilege based on birth, and established the principle that all citizens were equal before the law. No more aristocrats getting away with crimes because of their titles. No more laws that applied differently to different social classes. The code also enshrined religious tolerance. Jews and Protestants, who'd faced discrimination for centuries, were granted equal rights. Napoleon didn't do this because he was some great humanitarian. He did it because he thought it was efficient. He wanted the best people in the best positions, regardless of their religion or background. Talent and loyalty were what mattered. He reformed education, creating a system of state-run schools and universities designed to produce capable administrators and military officers. He standardized weights and measures across France. This is where the metric system comes from. He built roads, bridges, and canals. He created the Bank of France to stabilize the currency. He commissioned art and architecture on a massive scale, transforming Paris into a grand imperial capital. In many ways, Napoleon completed the French Revolution. He got rid of the feudal aristocracy and replaced it with a meritocracy. He modernized the state. He spread Enlightenment ideas about reason, efficiency, and individual rights. But, and this is a massive but, he also betrayed the revolution in fundamental ways. For one thing, he brought back slavery in French colonies in 1802. The revolution had abolished slavery in 1794, but Napoleon reinstated it because it was profitable. Tens of thousands of people in Haiti, Guadeloupe, and other French territories were forced back into bondage. When Haiti rebelled, Napoleon sent an army to crush the uprising. It failed. Haiti became the first black republic in the world, but not before tens of thousands died in brutal fighting. Napoleon also crushed political freedom. He censored newspapers and banned publications that criticized him. He created a secret police force that spied on potential enemies. He executed political opponents, including the Duke of Enghien, a member of the old royal family, who Napoleon had kidnapped and shot essentially as a warning to other royalists. When the Pope refused to support his policies, Napoleon had him arrested and imprisoned for years. And then there's the sheer megalomania of it all. Napoleon crowned himself emperor and created an imperial court that rivaled the splendor of the old monarchy he'd helped overthrow. He gave his brothers and sisters thrones across Europe. His brother Joseph became king of Spain. His brother Louis became king of Holland. His brother Jerome became king of Westphalia. His sisters married princes and generals. The Bonaparte family, which 20 years earlier had been scraping by on Corsica, now ruled half of Europe. Was this all hypocrisy? Was Napoleon just another tyrant wrapping himself in revolutionary rhetoric? Or was he genuinely trying to spread Enlightenment ideas, just with himself as the ultimate authority? Historians still argue about this. Some see him as a modernizer who dragged Europe into the 19th century. Others see him as a dictator who used progressive rhetoric to justify conquest and oppression. And speaking of conquest, Napoleon couldn't stop. Between 1805 and 1811, he fought war after war, expanding French power across Europe. He crushed the Austrians at Austerlitz. He destroyed the Prussian army at Jena and Auerstedt. He beat the Russians at Friedland. One by one, the great powers of Europe knelt before him. By 1810, Napoleon's empire was staggering in scope. France itself had expanded to include Belgium, the Netherlands, parts of Germany, and the entire Italian coast. French client states and allies covered most of the rest of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire, which had existed for 1,000 years, was dissolved because Napoleon said so. The map of Europe was being redrawn according to Napoleon's will. But empires built on conquest are inherently unstable. Every nation Napoleon defeated resented French domination. Nationalism was growing. People in Germany, Italy, and Spain were starting to think of themselves as part of nations that deserved self-determination, not as subjects of some French emperor. And Napoleon's continental system, his attempt to economically strangle Britain by banning European trade with them, was hurting European economies and breeding resentment. Napoleon's problem was that he couldn't accept limits. Every time he secured his position, he pushed for more. He always needed one more victory, one more territory, one more humiliation of his enemies. His ambition was limitless. And that unlimited ambition was about to destroy him. So here's the question I want you to think about. Was Napoleon a hero who spread progressive ideas and modernized Europe? Or was he a tyrant who sacrificed millions for his own glory? Can someone be both? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate has been raging for 2 centuries and shows no signs of stopping. Napoleon's downfall didn't come from one catastrophic mistake. It came from 1,000 small cracks that spread until the entire structure collapsed. And the first major crack was Spain. In 1808, Napoleon made a decision that seemed brilliant at the time but turned into a nightmare that bled his empire dry. Spain was technically an ally, but Napoleon didn't trust the Spanish king. So he invited the Spanish royal family to a meeting in France, essentially kidnapped them, forced them to abdicate, and installed his own brother Joseph as king of Spain. On paper, it was a masterstroke. Napoleon now controlled the entire Iberian Peninsula. Except the Spanish people didn't accept it. They rose in rebellion. And this wasn't a conventional war with armies facing each other on battlefields. This was guerrilla warfare, ambushes, sabotage, assassinations. French soldiers would be attacked in the streets. Supply convoys would disappear. Entire garrisons would be massacred in the night. The Spanish irregulars, supported by British forces under the Duke of Wellington, turned Spain into a meat grinder. Napoleon was forced to keep hundreds of thousands of troops tied down in Spain, fighting an enemy that refused to fight fair. He called it his Spanish ulcer, a wound that kept bleeding and wouldn't heal. Between 1808 and 1814, France lost over 300,000 soldiers in Spain. It was a catastrophic drain on resources and manpower, and it emboldened Napoleon's other enemies. If the Spanish could resist, maybe others could too. But Spain was just the warm-up act. The real disaster was Russia. By 1812, Napoleon's relationship with Russia had deteriorated. Tsar Alexander I had been forced to join Napoleon's continental system after being defeated in earlier wars, but he was secretly allowing Russian merchants to trade with Britain. Napoleon was furious. He decided that Russia needed to be taught a lesson so severe that no one would ever defy him again. In June 1812, Napoleon assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen. Over 600,000 men from across his empire, French, Germans, Italians, Poles, Dutch, even Spanish and Portuguese conscripts. It was supposed to be an unstoppable force. Napoleon planned to march into Russia, crush the Russian army in one or two decisive battles, and force Alexander to submit. It should have taken a few months at most. The Russians had other ideas. They refused to engage. Napoleon's army marched deeper and deeper into Russia, and the Russians just kept retreating. Worse, they practiced a scorched earth policy, burning crops, destroying supplies, leaving nothing for the French to requisition. Napoleon's massive army started to go hungry. The French finally caught up with the Russian army at Borodino in September, just 70 miles from Moscow. It was one of the bloodiest battles in history. Over 70,000 men were killed or wounded in a single day. Napoleon technically won, the Russians retreated, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. His army was shattered, and he still hadn't forced Russia to surrender. Napoleon entered Moscow on September 14th, expecting the Russians to negotiate. Instead, he found the city deserted, and then Moscow began to burn. The Russians had set their own capital on fire rather than let Napoleon have it intact. Fires raged for days, destroying 3/4 of the city. Napoleon waited in the ruins for 5 weeks, hoping the Tsar would ask for peace. The message never came. On October 19th, with winter approaching, Napoleon made the decision to retreat. It was already too late. The Russian winter came early and came hard. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Snow buried the roads. And the Russian army, along with irregular Cossack cavalry, harassed the French every step of the way. The retreat became a nightmare. Soldiers froze to death overnight, their bodies left in the snow. Horses died by the thousands and were immediately butchered for food. Discipline collapsed as men fought each other for scraps. Entire regiments simply disintegrated, the survivors straggling westward in broken mobs. The wounded were abandoned. The sick were left to die. At the Berezina River, the French army was nearly trapped. Russian forces were closing in from multiple directions. Napoleon's engineers built 2 makeshift bridges while the army fought a desperate rearguard action. Thousands of soldiers and civilians crowded onto the bridges. When Russian artillery started bombarding them, the bridges collapsed, sending hundreds into the icy water to drown. Others were crushed in the panic. Of the 600,000 men who entered Russia, fewer than 100,000 made it out. It was the single greatest military disaster in history up to that point. Napoleon had destroyed his own army. Europe smelled weakness. Prussia, which had been forced into alliance with France, switched sides. Austria, which had tried to play both sides, joined the coalition against Napoleon. Sweden, under Crown Prince Bernadotte, one of Napoleon's former marshals, joined in. Even some of Napoleon's own German allies turned against him. Napoleon rushed back to France and performed one last miracle. He raised a new army. In 1813, he fought a brilliant defensive campaign in Germany, winning several battles against numerically superior forces. For a brief moment, it looked like he might pull it off again. But there were just too many enemies and not enough French soldiers. At the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, also known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon faced the combined armies of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden. It was the largest battle in European history before World War I. Over 500,000 soldiers engaged. Napoleon lost decisively. His army retreated across the Rhine back into France. His German allies abandoned him. The empire was collapsing. In 1814, Allied armies invaded France itself. Napoleon fought a brilliant campaign, winning battle after battle against superior numbers. But he couldn't be everywhere at once. Paris fell. His own marshals, exhausted and seeing the writing on the wall, forced him to abdicate. The man who had ruled Europe was given a tiny island, Elba, off the coast of Italy, to rule. He was 44 years old and his empire was gone. But this is Napoleon we're talking about. He couldn't just retire quietly. In February 1815, he escaped from Elba with a handful of loyal soldiers and sailed back to France. When the French government sent troops to arrest him, Napoleon walked up to them alone, opened his coat and said, "If there is any soldier among you who wishes to kill his emperor, here I am." The soldiers threw down their weapons and cheered for him. Within days, entire regiments were defecting to Napoleon. Within 3 weeks, he was back in Paris without firing a shot. King Louis XVIII fled the country. Napoleon was emperor again. Europe was horrified. They assembled another coalition army, British, Prussian, Dutch, German, everyone who could send troops. Napoleon raised an army and marched to meet them in Belgium. His plan was to defeat the British and Prussian armies separately before they could unite. At first, it worked. He beat the Prussians at Ligny. Then came Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon attacked the British army commanded by the Duke of Wellington. It was a close-fought, brutal battle. The French came agonizingly close to breaking the British lines. But the Prussians arrived in the late afternoon, attacking Napoleon's flank. The French army, caught between two enemies, broke and ran. Napoleon's last gamble had failed. He abdicated again, hoping to escape to America and start over. The British captured him before he could leave. This time they weren't taking any chances. They exiled him to St. Helena, a tiny volcanic island in the South Atlantic, over 1,000 miles from the nearest land. It was the most remote prison imaginable. Napoleon would spend the last 6 years of his life there, and he knew it. He would never leave that island alive. St. Helena was Napoleon's Calvary. The island was bleak, windswept, and lonely. Napoleon was given a small house, Longwood House, that was damp, rat-infested, and uncomfortable. The British governor, Hudson Lowe, was petty and vindictive, enforcing humiliating restrictions. Napoleon wasn't allowed to be called emperor. He had to be addressed as General Bonaparte. His mail was censored. His movements were restricted. He was essentially a prisoner, and everyone knew it. Napoleon spent his days dictating his memoirs to a small group of loyal followers who'd chosen to accompany him into exile. He was crafting his own legend, rewriting history to portray himself as a champion of liberty who'd been betrayed by the old monarchies of Europe. He presented himself as a man of the people, a son of the revolution, tragically brought down by the forces of reaction. It was brilliant propaganda, and much of it stuck. But he was also sick. His health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from stomach pains, nausea, and weakness. He lost weight. His famous energy drained away. Modern doctors who've studied the records believe he probably had stomach cancer, though conspiracy theories about arsenic poisoning persist to this day. Some of Napoleon's hair samples show elevated arsenic levels, though this was probably from the wallpaper in Longwood House, which contained arsenic-based dyes. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died. He was 51 years old. His last words were reportedly, "France, Army, Head of the Army, Josephine," a poignant reference to his first wife, whom he divorced years earlier to marry a Habsburg princess and produce an heir. He was buried on St. Helena, though his will requested he be buried on the banks of the Seine, among the French people I have loved so much. Here's where the story gets fascinating. Napoleon's death didn't end his influence, it amplified it. Within years, the Napoleonic legend took hold across Europe. Romantic writers and artists portrayed him as a tragic hero, a genius destroyed by lesser men. Victor Hugo wrote poems about him. Countless paintings depicted him as a brooding, magnificent figure. His tomb on St. Helena became a pilgrimage site. In 1840, 19 years after his death, the French government brought Napoleon's remains back to Paris with enormous fanfare. Over 1 million people lined the streets to watch his coffin pass. He was interred in a magnificent tomb at Les Invalides, where he rests to this day under a massive dome. The exile had become a national hero. But what was Napoleon's actual legacy? Let's start with the Napoleonic Code, which is still the foundation of law in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Monaco, Italy, Romania, Egypt, Quebec, Louisiana, and dozens of other places. The idea that all citizens are equal before the law, that privilege shouldn't be based on birth. These weren't new ideas, but Napoleon turned them into practical, enforceable legal reality. That's massive. Napoleon's administrative reforms modernized government across Europe. His enemies, when they defeated him, kept many of his innovations because they worked. Merit-based bureaucracies, rational tax systems, standardized laws, these became the norm. The modern nation-state owes a huge debt to Napoleon's reforms. Militarily, Napoleon revolutionized warfare. The concept of the core system, living off the land, using speed and maneuverability to overcome superior numbers, these became standard. Military academies study his campaigns because the principles still apply. The idea of total war, of mobilizing an entire nation's resources, also comes from the Napoleonic era. But Napoleon also unleashed nationalism across Europe. When he conquered nations and redrew their borders, he inadvertently created a backlash. People in Germany, Italy, Poland, and elsewhere began to think of themselves as members of distinct nations that deserved self-determination. This nationalism would eventually lead to the unification of Germany and Italy, and also to the catastrophic nationalisms of the 20th century that produced 2 world wars. And then there's the cost. 5 million people died in the Napoleonic Wars. Entire generations of young men were wiped out across Europe. Cities were sacked. Economies were destroyed. Countries were bankrupted. And for what? So one man could build an empire? So France could dominate Europe? The human cost was staggering, and it's impossible to ignore. Napoleon himself is impossible to categorize. He spread revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality while ruling as a dictator. He promoted based on merit while creating a new aristocracy based on loyalty to himself. He modernized legal systems while crushing political freedom. He was a military genius who led his armies to disaster in Russia. He was a reformer who brought back slavery. He's a mass of contradictions. Different countries remember Napoleon differently. In France, he's largely a hero, a symbol of French glory and grandeur. In Britain, he's the ultimate enemy, though also grudgingly admired. In Haiti, he's remembered as a monster who tried to re-enslave a free people. In Germany and Italy, he's seen as both an oppressor and as someone whose conquests inadvertently sparked national consciousness. In Egypt, He's remembered for bringing modern scholarship and helping decipher hieroglyphics, but also for brutal conquest. The debates about Napoleon continue because the questions he raises are fundamental. Can progress be imposed by force? Is enlightened dictatorship better than chaotic democracy? How do we weigh brilliant achievement against terrible cost? Can genius excuse tyranny? These aren't just historical questions. They're deeply relevant to how we think about power and leadership today. So what do we do with Napoleon Bonaparte? How do we remember a man who was simultaneously a liberator and a tyrant, a genius and a megalomaniac, a reformer and a warmonger? Maybe the answer is that we don't have to choose. History is messy and complicated, and the most important figures are usually the most contradictory. Napoleon proved that one person can change the world. He rose from obscurity through sheer talent, willpower, and ambition. He rewrote the laws of Europe. He won battles that should have been impossible. He turned France from a chaotic revolutionary state into a dominant empire. And then he lost it all because he couldn't accept limitations, couldn't stop pushing, couldn't be satisfied with anything less than total domination. His story is a warning and an inspiration at the same time. It shows what human ambition can achieve and what it can destroy. It demonstrates that talent and merit can overcome birth and privilege, but also that unchecked power corrupts even the most brilliant minds. It proves that one person's actions can echo through centuries, for both good and ill. 200 years after his death, we're still arguing about Napoleon. Still trying to figure out if he was a hero or a villain. Still debating whether his achievements justify his crimes. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. Maybe the most important historical figures are the ones who force us to ask hard questions, who make us uncomfortable, who can't be reduced to simple heroes or villains. Napoleon changed warfare, politics, law, and the very concept of what one person could achieve. He dragged Europe out of feudalism and into modernity, even if he had to do it at gunpoint. He proved that a nobody from a backwater island could become the most powerful man on earth. And he demonstrated that even the mightiest empires, even the most brilliant strategists, eventually fall. So here's my final question for you, and I really want you to think about this. If you could go back in time and give Napoleon one piece of advice at any point in his life, something that might have changed the course of history, what would it be? Would you tell him to stop before invading Russia? To avoid Spain? To never crown himself emperor? Or would you tell him to push even harder, to consolidate his reforms before expanding his empire? Let me know in the comments, because these thought experiments help us understand not just Napoleon but ourselves and the nature of power. And if you made it this far, you're clearly someone who loves history as much as I do. You're the kind of person who understands that the past isn't just dusty facts. It's living, breathing drama that still shapes our world today. Do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. We've got so many more stories like this coming. Stories of triumph and tragedy, genius and madness, the people who changed everything and the forgotten figures who deserved better. Thanks for watching. Remember, history isn't just about understanding the past. It's about understanding ourselves, our capacity for greatness and for terrible mistakes, and the thin line between the two. Napoleon Bonaparte embodied that contradiction perfectly. And his story will never stop being relevant, because the questions he forces us to ask will never stop being important. See you in the next one.